I think more widely, Wagner, as was a phenomenon, was a symptom of the decrepitude and degeneration of the Russian state in the last 18 months.
Vladimir Putin has signed a decree demanding all mercenaries swear allegiance to him and to Russia, following the reported death of the Wagner group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin and his senior cohorts in Wednesday's plane crash. Captain John Foreman, CBE, is a former UK military attache to Moscow until September 2022 and former defence attache in Kyiv as well. John, good morning to you.
Good morning, Callum.
Just in your work then with the embassies in Moscow and indeed in Kyiv as well, how are you assessing the aftermath of this, particularly when it comes to Putin, his character, his response, his strategy here? What is your considerations on that?
Well, thank you for having me on. I go back to June and the imminent aftermath of the mutiny itself. And Putin looked very shook when he was on TV, and then he had to portray an air of calm, and that's what we've seen in the last 2 months. And I think that last 2 months he used wisely, but cynically, to prepare the path for the demise of Mr. Prigozhin this week. And as you said, now he's demanded the swearing of allegiance of mercenaries from the Wagner group to him. So it's all part of the sort of nationalisation of the Wagner movement as was. I said this week, actually, I thought Wagner, as we knew it, died when that coup failed just south of Moscow. So Mr. Putin is trying to show that he's in charge, he's issuing decrees, he's nationalising mercenaries. But I think underneath the surface, there's a great deal of doubt in the Russian system that it got to this point. How can you have armed gangs marching on Moscow on one hand if you're portraying an area of calm and everything's going well in the war on the other?
What about the suggestion that we heard from one of our guests earlier, who used to be an advisor at the Kremlin, who suggested that Prigozhin may not really, in the grand scheme of things, post-mutiny, have proved to be that much of a problem for Putin because he had ideas and he appealed to a certain range of people that perhaps could have been useful for Putin to keep on side to some extent?
Yeah, I think Prigozhin had political ambitions. We saw that before his coup. He was become more he wanted to play his prowess, as it was, on the battlefield into political space. But the problem he had, Mr. Prigozhin, he had troops, he had money, but he didn't have power. And when he came up against the real power players in the Russian system, Defense Minister Shoigu, General Gerasimov, and Putin himself, he played his cards and he lost, and he paid for that mistake with his life. I think, irrespective of Prigozhin's political ambition, he came up against Putin, and Putin's a vindictive man. Putin doesn't like those come against him. He saw him as a threat and he took him out.
In terms of where things go from here, one of the crucial questions is about stability or instability. Of course, Russia has invaded Ukraine. That situation is ongoing. But we read today that the Russian Volunteer Corps, this is a group of Russians fighting for Ukraine, said Wagner mercenaries should join their ranks and avenge Prigozhin's death. And that's an interesting dynamic, isn't it, to consider that there are various factions of Russians, and others indeed, who could see this as an opportunity for further instability or to further try to destabilise Putin.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, excuse me. I think on the Wagner themselves, the soldiers, their generals have been killed, decapitated in the parlance. What do those soldiers do themselves, the operatives from Wagner? Well, they can sign contracts and carry on fighting in Africa, making lots of money. They can join the army, which is probably less attractive because there's a good chance of being killed by the Ukrainians. They can leave, and there's a problem of men of violence. A lot of these are prisoners, rapists, murderers, going back to their communities and carrying on raping and murdering, or they can just be guns of hire in Africa. So that's the soldiers, and now there's another option. They can go and fight for the Ukrainians with this free corps against the Russians. I mean, I think their problem for these Wagnerites is they've got no leadership. And Mr. Putin spent probably 2 months making sure that these people who could be potential troublemakers in the system in the future are being tracked, monitored, or indeed arrested and taken out preemptively. We don't really know what's going on. I think more widely, Wagner, as was a phenomenon, was a symptom of the decrepitude and the degeneration of the Russian state in the last 18 months. We've seen massive casualties, the economy's under huge pressure, 1 million people have left, international sanctions. So the war has consumed everything inside Russia, war for war's sake, war without end. And I think the Wagner phenomenon in June, the end of this affair, is only one sort of milestone on that degeneration, which is going to continue.